Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street partners with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across the globe to develop community organising strategies and train leaders to build power from within their community. And in 2021, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to share their stories, inspire others, take action, give hope and organise communities for change. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. Are you passionate about providing access to justice? Maurice Blackburn, Australia's leading plaintiff law firm, is looking for a digital campaigns and communications manager to join its public affairs team, learn from and work with a highly successful, collaborative and skilled team in an engaging culture and supportive environment. The role can be based in Brisbane or Melbourne. Excellent. So you can either surf or ski. To apply, go to mauriceblackburn.com.au/careers. Be part of change and fight for fair. Apply now. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast that dives into the progressive campaigns and the issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. It was the 4th of July on Sunday just gone in the United States, celebrating Independence Day and all things America. So we thought we would get a friend of mine who I've known for a number of years, but I've been meaning to get him on the show, Kwesi Chappin, who is he's now a political consultant, but he was an organiser for Obama and then worked for the NOI and then was the senior political director for Colour of Change. He's now out on his own, but I thought I'd get him on the show today just to talk about America, where it's been and where it's going, particularly after the 4 years of Trump. So we're going to cover off a whole bunch of different issues that underpin American society, including its democracy, justice, employment, and healthcare. So that should be a good topic to do a bit of reflection on with Kwesi this week. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or Stitcher. And if you're an Apple Podcast user, please leave us a rating and give us a review. And don't forget to follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn for all of the updates for upcoming episodes. Okay, let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a glorious Wednesday morning, the 7th of July. And joining me from Washington, D.C. is a good friend of mine who I've been meaning to get on the show for some time. And given that it was the 4th of July, long weekend just gone, I thought here's a good opportunity just to unpack what is America. And that is the former organiser for OFA, former senior political director for Colour of Change, and now has crossed to the dark side to set up his own campaign community organising consultancy, because everyone's doing that these days. Kwesi Chappin, welcome to Socially Democratic.
Thank you for having me here.
I thought you would be the best person to do this because I kind of wanted to almost do like a sort of a community organiser post-campaign evaluation, but let's evaluate America of where it is at this moment in time, because obviously the previous 4 years has been crazy. I was actually, I'm going to take a bit of time, but I was reminded of a tweet that I was just scrolling through my camera phone the other day, and a tweet that came out. I can't actually remember when it came out, but it was that tweet that was 2016, Trump won't win. 2017, President Trump can't do that, can he? 2018, are you watching Hunger Games tonight? I hope my district wins. That came out, I think that came out before Trump actually won. How predictive was that?
It was pretty predictive. Shout out to whoever made that tweet.
Yeah. So I thought we could, with that in mind, I thought that maybe we could just sort of unpack various aspects of American life through the lens of politics, but particularly also looking at ways in which we can create change and lean on your experience as a community organizer. Maybe you can sort of shout out some of the good work that people are doing on the ground. But I thought we could talk about democracy. I thought we could talk about the issue of healthcare in the United States, the economy and employment, and by that I also mean jobs. And then maybe round it off by talking a bit about justice and policing and gun violence, since that was such a big issue over the summer 12 months ago. But I wanted to start with democracy because I feel like all of the other problems can be fixed if you fix your democracy. And President Obama's final address before he vacated the White House spoke about the critical need to protect the democracy of the United States. And that was where the next big battle was centered on. And then you fast forward to the 2020 presidential election, he was an oracle, because I don't think any of us predicted how much democracy was going to be under threat. And I wonder if he's reflected on it and thought that it could have got this bad. But, the very fabric upon which the United States has built a liberal democracy was very much under threat in the months leading up to the election, and then during the whole count process, and then days before the inauguration. Like, it was, we don't need to go over this, we've been this before, but it was insane. My first question to you is, how did we get here to that point?
This is such a good question. On behalf of all Americans, let me tell you. Well, one of the things I will say is that things wasn't just shaky in 2016. Right. Let's go back to, if you're looking at like voting rights situations, right? And this is like immigration issues, like SB 1040, that was their Arizona bill that was making it hard for illegal. It's like, wait, this is America? Like, hold up. Like, you start seeing this, quite frankly, from that Tea Party, the rise of Tea Party, because it was straight backlash of President Obama's presidency, right? Being elected in 2008, and that brought up in 2009 when they pushed back on healthcare reform, and then all of a sudden, this is when you start seeing like voter ID laws start coming in, of like folks were pushing back at what they thought it wasn't my America, right? And so when we saw in 2016, with Trump coming in, like, quite frankly, like a lot of Black folks weren't that shocked to me. Like, it was like, So we've seen bad movies before, right? Like, we've had local, whether it's local or governors or whoever, like we've had politicians, quite frankly, fuck us over, right? And so now a wider spread of America was getting fucked over by this president. And then that outrage became like, whoa, where's my democracy, right? With the Muslim ban, and then it was a bunch of stuff happening right away of like, I can't believe this happening. Well, you put the right people in power and you will see this all day, every day. And so it really goes back to like, there were little incidents popping up in 2010 and 12 in the state and locally, and then it just screwed up, right? In 2016, and then became right people got in office and they ran shop of like shipping away democracy, and had the privilege of, being able to, how do I say this? There were folks who had privilege in America and thinking it could never be that. And then in 2016, after election, tears came to their face, and they're like, oh shit, they're about to get fucked, right? And they continually got fucked for those 4 years. Black folks, quite frankly, in America were like, welcome. Like, we've been here. Like, this is what that press feels like, right? Yeah. And there's only a little taste of what it looks like. And so, yeah, democracy got screwed. And it, quite frankly, even with Biden in office, I think we'll get to this a little bit later on, it's still in my opinion, in dangerous territory.
If you go back even further, obviously in the 1960s, off the hard work of the civil rights movement, you do have the Voting Rights Act, which was is a landmark piece of legislation.
Yeah.
And then I can't think of the 70s and 80s about what happened from the Republican side to unpick that, but certainly the Newt Gingrich, when he came in and was Speaker of the House, and the Republican strategy to use existing gerrymander laws to slowly build political power at a lower government level, I felt like this was a long-term strategy by the Republicans to undermine democracy. I mean, that's going to take time to realign. If they started in what was that? The sort of the mid 90s, sort of towards the end of
when Newt was in power, right after again, Clinton got in office 92, 94, that backlash year. What was that? I forgot. Look it up later, but they came in with like a pact for America and like really swept it in with the evangelicals. Evangelicals came through, real heavy. Christian fundamentalists really came to rise around that time.
And then, there's obviously the legislation, the For the People Act that they're trying to get through Congress, and obviously the filibuster is going to mean that it won't. I mean, that seems to be the first piece of legislative reform that we've seen come through your national Congress in a generation, and it's stalling because of this arcane, anachronistic parliamentary convention. Where are you on the filibuster? Because I only found out a couple of weeks ago when we had Sam Schneidman on that you don't actually have to filibuster. You just email the clerk to say,
put a hold on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about this on the floor. No, it's insane that, like, yes, I get it when they back in the day. And when I mean back in the day, I mean like 1700s, right? Where they thought this is a great idea, right? The filibuster. But what ends up happening is like Jim Crow, right? Sean Thurman, people. That's the filibuster, like how it historically screwed over minorities in America. And quite frankly, screw the filibuster and everybody that rides with the filibuster, okay? It is not a good use of taxpayers' dollars, you get me? Of like, all right, you got elected, right? Representative democracy, okay, great. So why even stop the conversation from happening on the floor? They're afraid to take the vote, right? And then especially if they don't have like For the People Act, right? It was not going to get to 60, right? Quite frankly, did not have enough votes to get there. But yet, it wouldn't even be available but if we had 51 or 50 folks coming in, that's all we needed. But the filibuster blocks that. And now progress, and really what was the real reason why it's real shitty, especially like you get this president elected on these ideals, right? And he can't get this passed because of a filibuster. A parliament procedure, right? One little rule. It's not like life or death. No, it's literally a filibuster, like as Sam has said previously. It gets an email, right? So now, this is a threat of a filibuster. And then also it pits like Joe Manchin. What the fuck? Right? This guy gets all the power. This dude in West Virginia, right, gets all the power and gets to really say to black and brown folks in Texas, in Mississippi, and these states that have passed terrible voter ID laws, suppression laws, curbing down on like how black and brown folks vote. Just like that, just like that, just because of this damn filibuster. It's ridiculous, and it's going to impact Biden's presidency if it doesn't get rid of it. These compromises, like he wants to pull off, cool, but it's going to be some like hella watered down stuff that, quite frankly, people are going to be like, well, it's just more of the same shit I've seen before, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing that frustrates me the most at this moment is because the foundations upon which you can create change are built on a equal liberal democracy in which your representatives in various state and national governments reflect the will of the people. And at this point in time, your Senate does not reflect the will of the people. And I understand the checks and the balances between the two houses is the same as what we have here in Australia, right? But you can't create change when there's an imbalance built on a lie. And here is a moment. Here's a piece of legislation, and I'm sure that the current act, the For the People Act, probably doesn't even go far enough to try and fix some of these, but it's a start, right? And you can't even get that through. It just makes everything else that you want to do so much harder.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And let's be real here. Like this is the For the People Act was supposed to solve for a voter fraud nonsense, right? And voter fraud it statistically only happens like maybe 1% of the time, or some nonsense like that. We are doing crackdown laws, right, to snuff out 1%. But quite frankly, it's a lot of mistrust that the American people have on both sides, right? And so media gets into this, and then there's like conspiracy theories all damn day of like what's right, what's wrong. And so like For the People becomes a lightning rod issue. For the People, that becomes a lightning rod issues on both the Democrats and Republicans to say what's not, what's in it was good, what's in it that's bad, and then it becomes very muddled in the political crossfire of like what's actually great about it. And then I feel, quite frankly, our democracy suffers because of that, right? Of like, okay, we can't have honest conversations. I admire what the British Chamber is going to do. Just have it out. Just cuss out and like just go all in, right? And then, all right, after that bullshit is done, okay, great. Where can we find a real compromise and find solutions? And we're not finding solutions, especially around voter rights. And even Manchin's BS compromise he tried to do at the end for the People Act to get it past the filibuster was not enough, right? And so like you held up the filibuster to get Republicans on your side, right? And then they still said no. What are we doing here?
Like, did we not learn that experience from the first 2 or 3 years of the Obama administration? They just got completely stuffed around by the Republicans.
But it wasn't the Republicans. It was Democrats back then in 2009. Because we had all 3 chambers. It wasn't no filibuster nonsense back then in 2009.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It was literally Democrats, right, saying that, oh, I'm so scared about, going back to the district and saying this and this and that. Quite frankly, it's a system where people are worried about votes, or the right people are pushing the buttons, special interest groups are pushing the buttons and say, no, that's going to hurt my bottom line. And so the enablers around them allows Joe Manchin and others. In 2009, it was Joe Lieberman, right? Like, what are we talking about, right? We've seen this movie before.
Let's turn to actually one more question about that before we move on. Does this piece of legislation get up in the Senate in the 1990s pre-Newt Gingrich?
That's a good question. You know what? Yes. If conservative white Dems pushed it. At that point, you had this is Joe Biden was still in the Senate. You had Clinton up there, right? Of people who can get some type of compromise bills at that time before it got really too heated. And Bill at that time in the early 90s was a little bit of a Teflon, right? Because like you can kind of get what he wants, and that smooth Southern charm made it a bit easier to make it happen. So I think it could have, but not to this level where we're at right now in terms of like what we asked for in that For the People Act.
If the legislative path fails, then, let's go back to organising. Mm-hmm. What work needs to be done on the ground?
The problem is such a long-term problem. It's a long-term problem for a long-term solution. You need a long-term solution. So by me long-term, you gotta primary some of these people. So in particular, folks who were hesitant around this act, right, on the Democrat side, can you primary them and push them out and find someone that will? Quite frankly, Joe Manchin calculated. I was like, oh, I wish you would, right? and he's not going to have that problem. So it's primary. That's one way through elections of going after folks who did wrong in the upcoming midterms. Another way, you can. They already started doing this. The Biden administration has started suing some of the states with these terrible voter ID laws. So the Justice Department can ideally take it up to the Supreme Court. But organizing-wise, I feel it's through elections, and then it's hard to get folks out on this one issue. Americans, much as folks think there's a lot of single issue voters, they're not. It's all complicated. Like they're hella complicated. So this one issue only, quite frankly, impacts minorities, right? In cities, and they're already going to max out their vote, right? And so the folks where you really need impact will be in the suburbs and the rural areas, who actually love the mail-in voting and all the other stuff that came in from COVID, and be able to get them on your side and to be able to have those conversations of like, hey, here's how this impacts you. And quite frankly, didn't see organizers do that, or organizing campaign that went after that middle ground of like, okay, you got your base who are already on board and can make those connections. But can you explain the story of like, well, how does it affect Stacey in Iowa, right? You know what I mean? Like this Stacey the homemaker in Iowa, right? Those are the folks. Can you get her story of how this will impact her, right? And that's where I felt that we're lacking. That's going to take some long-term investment in order to make that conversation happen.
Healthcare.
Woo.
It's hard to not talk about healthcare without talking about COVID, but I do want to go back a little bit and reflect on the landmark victory that Obama and the Democratic Party got when they brought in the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as it's been titled. And it feels like that victory's now that was a long battle. It wasn't just the campaign to get the legislation through. It was then all the state-based challenges that took it all the way up through the courts to the Supreme Court, multiple challenges. And I feel like the Republicans have now put up the white flag and have come to accept its place in American society. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a very fair assessment. Obama in the Obama White House this is America, Jack. And so if we get some entitlement, the fuck you mean you're going to take it away? What? You give us a discount. You mean you take away the discount? No, that's not how this works in America. What you give it is us. It's hard to take back. And so, quite frankly, all the belly aching that happened in 2009 and 10 about, it was a right, you're going to take away my plan, da, da, da. And then people actually got on it, right? And you're like, oh, this is way better than what I had before, right? And once that assessment was made, you couldn't take it away, right? Because it wasn't just Democrats signing up for healthcare; it was Republicans, everybody who wanted access. And so, it once you give an entitlement in America to American citizens, it's impossible to take away. And so, much as they wanted to on the Supreme Court, they kept trying, but in fact, they didn't even make it that big of an issue in this last presidential election because they knew what it was, right? People were on it. So we're going to kick them off. We're going to make them pay even more. That's not going to happen, right? Once you've set a price, there's no way. So it was a smart political move for them. I mean, to lay off, but they should have did it even earlier. They gave it the funk once it passed, but for show.
Yeah. So you've got this foundation now. It's not perfect by any stretch of imagination. Certainly, if you compare it to universal health systems like here in Australia and Canada and Britain, and actually, wait a minute, everywhere. Let me list all of the countries of the world. But it is a foundation, and on good foundations, you need to build a house. Where do you start now? What needs to happen? And I don't think you can, correct me if I'm wrong here, Kwesi, but I don't think you can answer this question without actually looking at what has happened because of COVID and the impact it's had on minorities.
This is 100% true. And what's still happening to Black folks and minorities with this COVID. With ACA, in fact, I signed up for ACA for the very first time this year, right? I went through the process and it was like, oh, it is not that bad. I mean, obviously it wasn't 2010 when the shit hit the fan, right? When it first rolled out, but they improved the system where, yes, I can go in, pay some money and now have access for healthcare every month. But that does not solve the bigger problem that we saw that COVID exposed, that this health disparities in Black and brown communities, in particular in America, right? One, we don't get as much prevention, right, and treatment. And so stuff like diabetes and other issues, high blood pressure, overweightness, being overweight, obese, all that kind of came in and got really exposed with COVID because COVID literally preyed on those health disparities that Black and brown folks have at a higher risk because we have poor access to healthcare. So it's like a cycle of okay, you got poor access to healthcare, boom, we get this whole ass disease, we're wiping folks out. I'll never forget when it first hit, people in my community on Twitter were making jokes about, it's a myth, da-da-da. And then it hit Black folks right when the NBA shut down. When the NBA shut down in 2020, that's when Black folks realized, oh shit, this is something different. and this is when we had to go indoors, pandemic. And then I remember older white colleagues, and I had my Black colleagues were going through it, whether they themselves passed away or family members were being directly impacted by COVID, and whether they caught COVID and passed away, they felt it right away because someone in their family was experiencing it. So my family experienced that. And so it exposed, yes, you may have ACA, but that's not helping the bigger issues of health community access and access to good doctors and treatment facilities where we won't be so susceptible to COVID and other pandemic issues. And so the only solution I feel like right next is we do need to move to a universal healthcare system. It's only right. If you want to, I can say, well, it should be maybe as a part of reparations or some shit like that, right? If I wanted to make that connection. But one of the things that is critical is that in this pandemic exposed, if one community is hurt, and right now we are Black folks, in particular poor Black folks, are not as vaccinated as much as compared to other communities in America. And that's coming to fruition again with this whole ass Delta variant. I know y'all are catching hell in Australia right now, right? But I can imagine when when it gets here in bigger droves, it's going to hit like wildfire. And again, Black folks will be impacted again. There's one education, not education, more of like access and I want to say it's a cultural problem where it needs to be educated around like, okay, here's what the vaccine will be helpful and here's where it won't be helpful in order to prevent that. But then again, also like the issues that why COVID takes us all even harder, like that needs to be addressed. I felt like this COVID stuff really exposed like, oh damn, all these back there dying and Trump being in office didn't help at that time of how do we fix these problems long term, not just during a damn pandemic.
Two things I want to pick up there. The first one is I only took COVID seriously when the NBA season shut down as well. I don't know what that says about me. I'll let you be the judge of that. The second thing is, some pieces I've been reading over the last couple of months, which I didn't even realize, the distrust amongst people of color towards the health profession, boiling down to, an old black man who isn't unwell just won't bother going to the hospital because he doesn't trust the doctors down there. And there's a lack of diversity amongst health professionals as well. And they were holding up the model example of one or two hospitals where the staff are, black doctors, but this is a rarity. So there's even, this comes into this brings in education, doesn't it? In terms of how many young African-American men and women are we getting into colleges to get degrees to go then work to get then not even do that, but then just get jobs working in major hospitals to then,
Yes. It's systemic. And then even if you do go to a black hospital, quite frankly, here in America, you go to a majority of black hospitals, like, oh, you may be getting worse treatment than you would if you go to the other side of the tracks treatment. And then if you do go to that other side of the tracks where the white communities, your pay may get ignored because you have, guess what? Doctors may be biased too because they're humans. And so there's you might encounter a biased doctor, and that what ripples in effects like, damn, I don't want to go to the doctor. That old black man who had that experience of a doctor dismissing them, their pain, or not hearing them. You know what? Why would they?
Yeah.
They were disrespected before.
And it gets passed down from generation to generation. It sets this norm amongst the community that don't bother doing that,
Yeah.
What's the way forward in healthcare then to try and address some of these systemic issues?
It's one, like, I'm thinking of like what DC is doing in Prince County, the area where I live in now, which is predominantly black folks. They're putting more services in our community, right? In terms of like, if you're talking about vaccines, there's more like vaccine centers happening, but like it needs to be more long-term. Like you can't just have hospitals. Hospitals are for emergencies. What are we doing for more prevention? Right, clinics, right, we're set up investing in the healthcare system in communities so they can build a relationship with their doctor. They need that's literally as an organizer, right? One of the things that you, in order to get over that hump, is that one, how are you building a relationship? How is that doctor building a relationship with that community that they're serving? Just like a police officer, are they living in that neighborhood? Right? Are they from that neighborhood? Right? Because that goes a long way in order to build trust. And what we have here is, in particular in minority communities, is a lack of trust, right? And so if there's a lack of trust, what are we doing around that? And that starts with having more, just like doing a school, right? One teacher to 15 students, you want more doctors from that community to be able to serve. And so that means having more access. So that way they're not waiting till they need to go to the ER, right? Okay, what does it look like? Clinics, right? Putting in services, nurses from that community, giving out those education grants to STEM scholarships for folks to encourage people in that community to take on that field. it's small things that could be done as we speak right now, but politics.
You can't answer every question with, but politics. Let's turn to the economy and broadly speaking, employment, and by virtue of that, I mean jobs.
Yeah.
The perception of workers and working in the United States from an outsider is that you guys get paid peanuts, that you don't have any holidays, and the whole work experience really is a challenge for whether you're you have a family or if you're living on your own, and indeed at acute moments throughout the economic cycle, sometimes it's really, really hard to get a job. I remember sitting in a bar in Cambridge, Massachusetts one night talking to a guy who literally had just finished his degree at MIT. He was having a beer, and I said, "What are you doing now?" And he said, "I'm working at a Walgreens around the corner because I can't get work." He studied at MIT.
Yep.
He's probably the smartest person on this planet. Now, that was, to be fair, that was 2012, so it wasn't that long after the GFC. So I know the American economy was in a bit of a shit then. But anyway, so what is the experience right now, do you think? And I know that it changes from period to period, but talk to me about sort of give us a holistic kind of look at the American economy as it is right now.
Well, that's pretty right. It's still kind of screwy. It's one, America has rushed back open up because of that whole thing, the economy and jobs, of like trying to jumpstart it, right? More retail service, people, get America back working, that type of deal. But it was screwed before the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
It just got exposed even more. In terms of particular impacting, again, Black and brown folks, particularly Black folks, have been screwed over even more because they had some of the retail jobs, those lower end jobs that could quickly be wiped away. And then the thing about these jobs reports, okay, great, people may be getting hired, but they're getting hired, like you said, for peanuts, right? So they're underpaid, right? And they may be getting that 39 hours, on their paycheck, and that cuts them off from being eligible to get benefits and all the other stuff. And so where does that go, right? Oh, don't have access to pay for a doctor. Oh, I wonder what builds up from there, right? So it's a systemic cycle that happens. And so the jobs happening right now, it's lower paid jobs. Like, this is relevant towards, I don't know if you've been keeping up with trying to unionize Amazon here in the States. It did it down south, which tried to, but it failed, right? Of like trying to get better paying jobs, more sustainable jobs for folks, importantly. But again, they're these companies, and they don't care too much about the work as much, because they feel that it can be replaceable as needed.
I certainly don't. The Australian system was built on the premise that there should be an independent umpire that would arbitrate between employers and employees. This is the foundation of the Australian Federation, and even that. And I probably need to do another podcast on this, actually, to get someone from one of the unions on to talk about it, because I think that the folks in the union movement here in Australia right now are sort of going, well, even there, we don't think that the independent umpire is that independent anymore, or it's not ruling in favour of working people as consistently as maybe it did a long time ago. And I know that that's not a pillar of the US industrial relations system, and it's very much always been based on bargaining. And if you're, and correct me here if I'm wrong, Kwesi, but if you're in a union job, then you are by and large going to be better off. You're going to have healthcare benefits. You're going to get a decent wage, access to sick leave, all those kind of things. So that's great for those folks, but obviously there's still more wins to have there, right? That's not nirvana for those workers either, but certainly for the folks that aren't organised, then this is what you're talking about, this experience. It's so difficult in the United States to get organised in in workplaces, and some of the like you talked about the Amazon campaign just recently, and just incidentally to our listeners, we're going to have someone from the retail union in the United States on the show in early August to talk about that campaign in particular. But just talk to us about the challenges that are on the ground for labour unions trying to organise workers to improve, just to get basic, things like minimum wage.
I mean, minimum wage we'll start off with the Fight for 15 campaign. So the Fight for 15 campaign really came from fast food workers saying like, hey, can I at least get $15 an hour for the work I do, right? The amount of labor of this billion-dollar company, right? What does it look like in terms of like trickling it down? And that's where it started. And really, even then, getting those retail workers and service workers a fair minimum wage, $15 an hour is shit.
Yeah, no.
Right? It's not that much, but it's still an uphill battle just for that, because companies have interest and they always hit you. Well, what about my bottom line? Or what about service? It's like, wait, this happens in other countries. Other people have a better living wage. What's the hold up? And then you get to the one of the major holes is that companies have a best interest in not seeing that happen, and will do anything they can to stop that, right? Because it impacts their bottom line. And so you will have, like with Amazon and others, like you have companies that will actively organize against organizers. So it isn't like, we're laying down. No, they're putting some money behind these campaigns, and so it really becomes people power versus money power. And this is America, and so money's gonna win for the most part until there's a tip over of when people just get fed up around this. And so the organizing efforts around labor, whether it's this is not just in private companies, this is also in nonprofits. You see this, right? It being extremely hard of finding folks who are fed up enough in that workplace to say, all right, I'm ready to buck at the boss, essentially, right? Or say, I had enough, right? And then finding others who agree with you. And all of a sudden is the incentive, like what hovers over you, you can be fired and lose your livelihood at any moment if you can get caught, particularly, especially in workplaces where they try to stomp down. So that's your Walmarts, right? Big employers in these communities. Let's look at Walmart, for instance. In rural Arkansas, right? In rural Arkansas, where Walmart will be the biggest employer in your town. Ain't no pushback in that, because if you mess up at that Walmart, guess what? The McDonald's is not going to hire you, right? Because it's such they impact small town economies. So it's not just like the big cities we're talking about. We're also looking at rural places where these big box stores and these other non-union shops would impact an economy in a local place. So the stakes become very high, and there are other people with special interests. Sometimes government officials who want to make sure that doesn't happen as well, because they may have an investment in that and make sure that company is profitable, or quite frankly, that company may pay for their campaign, right? And they are invested in staying quiet around those labor issues. And so there's a lot of folks in America against the worker. And so it really becomes just a worker and themselves, like in order to eke something out, and they're eking things out. We can go into my analysis of the American labor movement a little bit later, but like, quite frankly, long story short, they got us a weekend and Labor Day, right? And then the community Americans pretty much forgot about the unions after that, right? And now it's just like, every man for themselves type of ethic right now.
I think that's the experience here as well. I mean, there's been a lot. I feel for the union movement in a lot of their. I use the word marketing. I don't mean that term, but they're constantly, and I felt this when I was a union organizer, trying to reaffirm to members and to workers, hey, it was unions that got us, weekends. It was unions that got us a minimum rate of pay. It was unions that got us superannuation. It was unions that got us annual 4 weeks annual leave. It was unions that got, but when you do say that, it's glazed eyes from people. The sort of, whatever. And I think that the language as well of when we say it's unions, I was only later in my career I started to realise, hang on a minute, well, they see me as the union. I don't want you to see me as the union. Yeah, I'm wearing a union polo or whatever, and I'm rocking up on this side. But it's actually you guys are the union.
Right.
I just work for you. It's your membership fees that pay my wages for me to come in and help organise you guys. So you're the union. And some workplaces, when you built relationships with those workers, they eventually went, we get this now. All right, we understand our power. Right, well, okay, let's work together and how we can strategize to try and, for our next EBA negotiation or whatever. But some of the bigger ones, they're just like, you're talking to me in a foreign language, Stephen. I have no idea what you're talking about. I literally just come to work here once. I'm working part-time. I'm going to university. I don't give a shit about this job. Shut up, get out of my way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. And also, quite frankly, unions here for a period only worried about their own issues, right? They recently started caring a lot more about racial justice issues and starting weighing in on other issues. So they're becoming more relevant outside of just of labor issues. And that's going to hopefully impact households, but I don't know. It's an uphill battle of one, really getting into for workers here, what does it mean for people power, and what does that look like? What does that dream about? I think people haven't seen the dream yet. It's always we're trying to protect something, but damn, what does it look like to get a dream going?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the issue, big picture wise, I see with the union movement here.
One last question on that before we move on to the final topic of today's podcast. Very sneaky of the Republican Party. I mean, the hypocrisy is just dripping, but they are talking working man's language and are really appealing to that base vote, particularly amongst white males who would probably have union jobs, but at the same time, and also verbally sort of getting stuck into the big corporations that are seen to be socially progressive. But at the same time, and this is complex in some ways, because at the same time, they're getting stuck into like Jeff Bezos for whatever reason. But at the same time, there is a shared interest between the Republican Party and Amazon in screwing over workers, and they are doing that behind the scenes. That's happening in the dark, smoke-filled rooms. But out front, they're looking like, we're the party for the working man. And when you got sort of AOC running around on a whole bunch of sort of radical left-wing social justice issues that are not appealing to sort of suburban Americans, that language fits with them, and they go, the Republican Party is my party. Whereas, for the last 100 years, the Democratic Party was their party. It was the party of the working people. And I'm worried right now about this moment because I feel like we're at a tipping point where this could flip. And working people all of a sudden, broadly speaking, working people can just start voting Republican as opposed to voting Democrat. And what are your thoughts about that? I mean, is that something that is a concern within the movement, or am I just reading this wrong?
No, you're reading it right. I mean, let's look at Ohio, okay? Ohio voted for Obama 2008 and 12. And then Trump both times in 2016 and 20, okay? And that's what we call the Rust Belt, right? Ohio, Pennsylvania, those areas where steel industries and other factory workers essentially hold up those communities, but have, again, the economy, those jobs look a little different. And they felt, well, the Democrats didn't get it done. Well, maybe the Republicans can, right? And they haven't gotten that done either. But guess what? It's not around those working values. They're hitting another chord. Those white men are feeling make America great again. where does that come from? Right? Those undertones of like, hey, you're jobless, right? It's these other people who are doing this to you, right? And that sense of ownership kind of comes in with that messaging that can't be touched by Democrats right now, because you're appealing to their core of like, okay, I can't put food on my table right now. I'm pissed off about that, or pissed off about something else that's going on. There's these woke companies, right? These woke companies are doing this, da da da. This is just not the America I get.
Yeah.
And so that sensationalism, and hence why Trump still gets selling out damn rallies and shit, right? There's always going to be an audience for that. They became even more bold in there. A lot of racial undertones that comes in that messaging that Republicans are doing that hits their core, quite frankly. And in order for Democrats to move that over, what are the tangible things Democrats can say like, hey, we got them for you, right? And if Democrats don't have that answer in 2022, they're going to get crushed. And in 2024, they're going to get crushed as well. If you can't come up with those tangible things to combat that nonsense that's going to happen from on the other side of like appealing to that dog whistling of like, oh, make America great again, and Trump will come up with something new, and these other folks will play that up around those racial undertones, whether it's Asian hate or whatever. They'll find a way to rally us versus them, and then make it about, oh, okay, great, this is where the real working values bullshit comes in.
Let's move to the last one, which is, broadly speaking, justice, but I want to include in that sort of policing and gun violence and that sort of whole kit and caboodle. And so much happened last year with the Black Lives Matter movement and protests sparking up across the country, which were historic, really. I mean, it's sort of 1968 all over again. Just
yeah.
And just watching it at the time, at the start, it sort of seemed like, oh, this will probably last a week, but it went on and on and on and on and on. I went, oh, this is profound. You and I have not spoken about this on air, but I know we've talked about it privately. What were your feelings coming out of that summer in terms of the direction that the country was heading? Did you come out of that with hope, or did you come out of that feeling even more depressed about it as a person of color?
That's a good question. Like for me, I came away with hope because, it's a whole ass pandemic happening and people still in these streets. I saw stuff like little peaks with like Occupy Wall Street of like people just pissed off. But even then, the Occupy Wall Street crowd were a lot of like the activists and young folks kind of getting together at in 2009. I can't remember when that happened, but then there are little uprisings that happened after after Mike Brown was killed, Trayvon Martin. This little pocket of the consistent and the sheer amount of volume of new faces. It wasn't just Black folks, but like other allies, like the conversation that we were having. I had never seen anything like that. It gave me a lot of hope of people who just were like, whoa, this is fucked up. Didn't know it was this bad. Welcome to the world, and like find a way to plug in and participate. Quite frankly, that it gave me hope. But now I feel I'm worried about what happens this year. I mean, you can't pass the Breathe Act, right? You can't pass For the People Act of issues that were directly, particularly the Breathe Act, where even though there's some flaws around that bill, but we're directly addressing some of the stuff that caused those uprisings, starting to address some of the systemic problems that we were seeing there. And so I I'm less hopeful now. It's about like, okay, can we move this into a direction where people can actually take this on to a new level, and similar to what we saw in the Civil Rights Act. But it was way more people that saw it, and quite frankly, I felt we missed a moment putting it all on this election, right? And then now what? Right? You get these people get these people elected who were supposed to pass these laws, but the real work begins. Election is just a tactic, right? If you're talking about a movement, you see these elections as one step. The real work, where the big ass rallies around the For the People Act, around the Breathe Act, on all these other possibilities to address these systemic changes. That's where that people power is still untapped. So I am less hopeful because it hasn't happened, but it's a lot of untapped energy right now that just hasn't been. People are amped up and want something to do, and I felt like we haven't given them the correct thing to do yet. And we organizers haven't gotten to a space yet of, all right, here's what you do now. Here's how you take back your little corner of your community, because DC is going to be bullshit for a minute.
Your former colleague from Colour of Change, the then national field director, but I think she's gone on to bigger and better things. Shannon was on the show during the Black Lives. Well, maybe it was just after sort of the summer kind of ended, when she had time to breathe and have get her head above water for a moment, because I'm sure she was flat out. But she talked about leading into the elections about running the Colour of Change. Were running a bunch of campaigns to try and change the types of folks that are getting DA jobs and sort of justice campaigns. And obviously, you were super close to that before you moved on to bigger and better things. Give us a bit of an overview of the successes and failures of that campaign had leading up to the 2020 election.
Actually, went really well. The district attorney elections that Colour of Change PAC was taking on at that time, where in major cities like Los Angeles, Chicago was up. There of course in Florida, Broward County, we won in places, got elected progressive young prosecutors who would immediately have an impact on Black lives, right in their own local communities. And quite frankly, there was a lot of energy around those DAs, than sometimes more than the presidential, because people can feel and taste. And once you tell them what the hell a DA does, district attorney does, prosecutor does, like, oh shit, I can elect that person? Like, yes, this is the thing you can do, right? To change, like to make life a bit different dramatically. That to me, like, I think is like the next level of like, because people are quite frankly, especially after 2022, I'm making bold predictions, it's going to be a shit show, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And so on the federal level, I feel you get more bang for the buck in terms of like getting people to buy in, particularly Black folks to buy in on our democracy, and at the local level, local office. So that's district attorney, that's mayor, that's county commissioner, people that control those budgets. It's like the boring ass positions that won't get the TV time, but will really impact, politics is an allocation of resources, okay? These are the people that will literally impact your life. They can literally decide how much funding your school gets, how much do you get a park in this school, in this neighborhood, or do you get a trash plant? You know what I mean? Like those little things that will impact your quality of life are being decided at the local elections. So getting those folks engaged on local elections and give people a taste of what a win looks like before going up towards the bigger offices is I think is a strategy, and the Colour of Change implies and has been successful of like, all right, we got this DA, now we can actually see some criminal justice reform. But then again, what's happening, for instance, like Lake Krasner, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, district attorney. He's one person, right, in a state, right, with state laws, right. So he's capped at like the reform and the reform that he's able to do, even though he's the king of Philadelphia around criminal justice. But like, no, these judges and the state laws have a different way of going about things. And so, yeah, it's limitations of our criminal justice system is being exposed, and also there are a couple of wedges we can go in and blow some shit up, and that's been the fun part of the past couple of years of seeing the rise of progressive district attorneys.
We could talk about this and all these other topics. Well, we didn't even cover education or climate. There's so much more we could go into, and sports. But we're going to have to leave it there. And I wanted to end it on a reasonably good note there, because there were some positivities that came out of that campaign that you guys ran for Colour of Change, and I'm so impressed with the hard work that you and Shannon and a whole bunch of others put into that election year. I know it wasn't easy, particularly off the back of the summer that you guys had, but it was fantastic to see that you had some wins on the board in electing some good people and hopefully creating change. Kwesi, wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you want to plug? I know that we do have some folks in the US that listen to the show. Do you want to plug your new venture these days, or what you're working on?
Sure. It's Chappin Consulting. But if you want to get a hold of me right now, just follow me on Instagram, Kwesi C. That's the best way to get a hold of me right now. The website's in the works. And yeah, it's doing whole political consulting. What the hell is a political consultant? That means I do a lot.
I still haven't landed. How do I describe what my job is? Don't worry. In fact, I was down in Warrigal visiting my mum on the weekend, and she was talking to, I don't know, one of the aunties or something, and they asked, so what does Stephen do? And mum was trying to explain to me what she explained to them. Even like, I just felt for mum, because like, mum, I can't help you because I can't explain it either. So, you just make it up. Just make it up. It doesn't matter.
I mean, at this point, I'm going to start doing that.
Yeah, she got the... He's organising. I think he's organising something. And I was like, Mum, that's good enough for me.
Anyway. Sounds right.
All right, man. Good to see you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.